You meet someone at 32 years old, and she's everything you've been looking for. She's patient. She's understanding. She laughs at your jokes even when you tell them twice because you forgot you already said them. She doesn't mind when you're late. She thinks your intense deep dives into obscure topics are charming. She finds your spontaneity exciting. Fast forward 8 years and you're sitting across from her at the kitchen table, and she's telling you she can't do this anymore. She's 40 now. You're 40, and the patience she had, it's gone. The understanding evaporated. The charm she saw in your quirks, she calls them deal breakers now. And here's what nobody tells you about this pattern. Here's what makes it so devastating. It's not that she stopped loving you. It's that she finally stopped waiting for you to become the person she needed you to be 8 years ago. Let me tell you what's really happening when women over 40 walk away from ADHD men and never look back. It's not about age being just a number or some midlife crisis nonsense. There's a psychological and biological shift that happens in women around this age that fundamentally changes how they evaluate relationships, how much they're willing to tolerate, and what they need from a partner. When a woman is in her 20s and 30s, she's often operating in what psychologists call the optimization phase. She's building, she's investing, she's thinking long-term. She's willing to put up with difficulties now because she believes things will get better. She has time. Her biological clock might be ticking, but she's got years ahead of her. She can afford to be patient with your forgotten anniversaries, your half-finished projects, your promise to get better at managing money that never quite materializes. But something shifts around 40. Her tolerance for potential versus reality drops dramatically. She's not interested in what you might become anymore. She's only interested in what you actually are. You want to know what this looks like in real time? It's the woman who spent her 30s reminding you about bills, appointments, family obligations, social commitments. She made the lists. She sent the calendar invites. She double-checked everything because your working memory is essentially a sieve, and she knew it. She compensated for your executive function deficits without even having language for what she was doing. And she did it willingly because she loved you and she believed you were trying. But at 42, something breaks. Maybe it's the morning she realizes she's been managing 2 full-time jobs, hers and yours, for over a decade. Maybe it's when she calculates how many hours of her life she's spent being your external hard drive, your personal assistant, your emotional support system, while her own needs got pushed further and further down the list. The resentment that's been building doesn't just bubble up, it crystallizes into a decision. And here's the thing about women over 40. When they make that decision, they don't waver. They don't second guess. They're done. Not I need space done. Not let's try counseling done. They're I've already mourned this relationship and moved on emotionally 6 months ago done. The neuroscience behind this shift is fascinating and brutal. Women's brains undergo significant changes during perimenopause and menopause. The prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for emotional regulation and decision-making, actually becomes more efficient at pruning away what's not essential. There's a neurological decluttering that happens, things she used to be able to brush off or reframe positively. Her brain literally becomes less capable of that kind of generous interpretation. The neural pathways that supported patience and accommodation start getting outcompeted by pathways that prioritize self-preservation and resource conservation. It's not that she's becoming bitter or giving up on love. It's that her brain is finally prioritizing her own well-being, after decades of being wired to prioritize everyone else. And your ADHD patterns that she used to find endearing or manageable, they now trigger a stress response because her nervous system has logged thousands of instances of disappointment, of picking up your slack, of being let down. Your brain hasn't changed, but hers has, and it's no longer willing to accommodate yours. Let's talk about the specific patterns that become unbearable. Time blindness. When you were younger, being an hour late to things was quirky. It was frustrating, but she could laugh it off or make excuses to her friends and family. But at 40, she's been late to her own mother's birthday dinner because of you. She's missed professional opportunities because you lost track of time, and she couldn't leave you to handle the kids alone. She stood in parking lots waiting for you while important events started without her, texting you over and over, watching other couples walk in together. Each instance wasn't a huge deal in isolation, but they've stacked up like compound interest on a debt you didn't know you were accumulating. By 40, she's done the math. She's calculated exactly how many hours of her life she's spent waiting for you. And the number is staggering. She's not willing to give you one more minute. The financial chaos that comes with ADHD and impulsivity? In your 30s, she could rationalize it. You were both still building your careers. There was time to recover from your impulsive purchases, your forgotten bills that racked up late fees, your inability to plan for large expenses. But at 40, she's looking at retirement calculations and realizing you have almost nothing saved. She's seeing friends her age talking about investment properties and early retirement, while she's still recovering from the time you decided to day trade stocks without telling her, or the business idea you sank $5,000 into that went nowhere, or the subscription services you forgot to cancel that drained hundreds from the account. The future she imagined is slipping away not because of bad luck or market crashes, but because your executive function deficits have financial consequences that compound over decades. And she's tired of being the only adult in the room when it comes to money. She's tired of the anxiety that lives in her chest every time she checks the bank account. She's 40 years old and she wants peace. She wants security, and you're the opposite of both. Here's what makes this particularly painful. You probably didn't change. You're the same person you've always been. Your ADHD symptoms are consistent. You're not worse than you were at 30, but her capacity to manage the impact of those symptoms has been completely depleted. Compassion fatigue is a documented psychological phenomenon, usually discussed in the context of healthcare workers and therapists, but it applies perfectly to partners of neurodivergent men. After years of being the one who remembers everything, who manages everything, who compensates for everything, the part of her brain that generates empathy for your struggles just stops functioning. It's not cruelty, it's protective numbness. Her nervous system is trying to save her from drowning. And the life preserver she grabs is distance from you. If this is hitting close to home, if you're recognizing your own relationship in these words, hit that like button because this is the conversation nobody else is having with you. This is the truth that therapists dance around, and friends are too uncomfortable to say directly. The thing about ADHD is that it makes you really good at the beginning of things, and really bad at the maintenance. You were probably amazing when you first got together. You hyper-focused on her. You sent thoughtful messages. You planned creative dates. Your spontaneity felt romantic. You could sustain that intense focus for months, maybe even a couple years. But then the relationship became established and your brain stopped seeing it as novel and interesting. And the maintenance work that relationships require, that's executive function. That's routine. That's remembering to ask about her day and actually listening to the answer instead of thinking about something else. That's noticing when she's stressed and taking initiative to help without being asked. That's planning for anniversaries and birthdays and holidays before the last minute. That's emotional availability on a consistent basis, not just when you happen to be regulated and present. And your ADHD brain is terrible at all of that. At 30, she could see the effort you were making even when you failed. At 40, she only sees the failures. The effort doesn't count anymore because the outcome never changes. The emotional regulation piece becomes impossible for her to tolerate. Your rejection sensitivity means criticism of any kind, sends you into a spiral. She's learned over the years that she can't express frustration or disappointment without you experiencing it as a devastating attack. So she's been walking on eggshells, editing her needs, suppressing her feelings to avoid triggering your emotional dysregulation. She's made herself smaller and quieter to accommodate your nervous system. But at 40, something in her just stops being willing to do that. Maybe it's hormonal changes reducing her filter. Maybe it's accumulated resentment finally exceeding her capacity to contain it. Maybe it's just exhaustion. But suddenly she's saying the things she's been holding back for years. And when you react with the same hurt feelings and shut-down behavior you always do, instead of feeling guilty and backtracking to comfort you, she feels nothing. Or worse, she feels relieved that she finally told the truth. Your pain no longer has the power to make her abandon her own needs, and that's when you know it's over. Let's talk about the invisible labor, because this is the thing you probably don't even realize she's been doing. Researchers have documented that women perform an enormous amount of cognitive labor in relationships and households. The mental work of remembering, planning, organizing, and delegating tasks. For neurotypical couples, this creates resentment. For a relationship where one partner has significant executive function deficits, the imbalance becomes astronomical. She's not just managing the household logistics. She's managing your neurology. She's your external executive function. She remembers your family members' birthdays and makes sure you call them. She notices when you're getting overwhelmed and suggests you take a break. She tracks your medication if you take any. She reminds you about work deadlines. She structures the home environment to minimize your distractions. She runs interference with family and friends when you say something too blunt or miss social cues. She's essentially doing the job of a full-time professional organizer and life coach, unpaid, unacknowledged, on top of everything else she's managing in her own life. At 30, she might have taken some pride in being the capable one, the person who keeps everything running. At 40, she's just exhausted. She's got her own career stress, her own aging parents to worry about, possibly her own perimenopause symptoms that are challenging, and she's finally asking herself why she's spending so much energy managing an adult man who should be managing himself. The social costs start mattering more to her. When you were younger, her friends thought your quirkiness was interesting. Now they ask her pointed questions about why you never participate in conversation at gatherings, why you're always on your phone, why you monopolize the conversation talking about your special interest for 40 minutes while everyone else sat there politely. They've stopped inviting you to things and just invite her. At first, she made excuses for you. Now she's relieved when you don't come because she can relax and not worry about what you're doing or saying. She's realized that having you around in social situations creates work for her, rather than being a source of support or companionship. And at 40, she's prioritizing the friendships and social connections that energize her rather than drain her. You've become someone she manages in social situations rather than someone she enjoys having by her side, and she's not willing to keep doing it. Here's a specific scenario that probably feels familiar. Saturday morning, she asks you to do 3 things while she's at her yoga class. Clean the kitchen, take the dog to the vet for his shot, and pick up groceries. You fully intend to do all 3. You're not trying to be difficult, but you sit down to check something on your computer, and the next thing you know, it's been 3 hours and you've gone down a research rabbit hole about something completely unrelated. She comes home, and nothing is done. You genuinely don't know where the time went. You feel terrible. You apologize, you explain what happened, and she just looks at you with this exhausted expression and says nothing, because she's explained to you 50 times how time blindness works and it doesn't matter, because you still don't manage it. She's tired of explanations. She's tired of apologies that don't lead to change. She's tired of being the only person in the relationship who follows through on commitments. At 35, she would have gotten frustrated but eventually let it go. At 43, she's making mental calculations about what her life would look like if she only had to manage herself and her own responsibilities. And the freedom in that imagined scenario is intoxicating. The database of disappointments she's carrying in her head is enormous. Every forgotten anniversary, every time you promised to handle something and didn't, every important conversation where you were physically present but mentally checked out, every time she had to cover for you with your boss, your family, your friends, every financial setback caused by your impulsivity, every social embarrassment, every night she went to bed angry because you hyper-focused on a video game instead of spending time with her. Every morning she woke up to find you'd stayed up until 4 in the morning, doing something that didn't matter, while important things remained undone. Every time she begged you to get help, to try medication, to work with a therapist or coach, and you agreed but never followed through. At 30, these were isolated incidents. At 40, they've formed a pattern so clear and undeniable that she can predict your behavior with depressing accuracy. And she's done waiting for the pattern to change. Subscribe to this channel if you want the truth about neurodivergence and relationships that nobody else is willing to tell you. The stuff that makes a real difference in understanding what's happening. The thing about women over 40 is that many of them have spent 20 years putting everyone else's needs first. Their children if they have them, their partners, their aging parents, their careers, their communities. And somewhere around 40, there's often a psychological reckoning. They start asking themselves what they've received in return for all that caretaking. They start evaluating whether the people they've been pouring into are pouring back into them. And if the answer is no, if the relationship has been a one-way street for years, they start planning their exit. Your ADHD means you're not great at noticing what other people need unless they explicitly tell you, and often not even then. You're not intentionally selfish. Your brain just doesn't naturally attend to those signals, but the impact on her is the same as if you were intentionally selfish. She's been depleted. She's been giving and giving and giving. And at 40, she's finally ready to stop. The identity crisis this causes for ADHD men is profound. You probably constructed your sense of self around being a good guy who tries hard. You're not abusive. You're not mean. You love her. You've always loved her. How can she be leaving when you've never stopped caring? But here's what you're missing. Love isn't enough. Effort isn't enough. Good intentions aren't enough. What matters in a long-term relationship is consistent, reliable, daily follow-through on the mundane tasks that make life work. What matters is being a true partner who carries equal weight. What matters is her not having to parent you. And your neurology makes all of that incredibly difficult. Not impossible, but difficult. And the difficulty of it means you fail more often than you succeed. And after a decade or more of that pattern, her capacity to find your failures understandable or forgivable is just gone. Let's talk about sex because this is part of the pattern too. ADHD often comes with either a very high sex drive or a very low one, and both create problems in long-term relationships. If you have a high drive, you might be hyper-focused on physical intimacy as one of the few places you feel fully present and connected. But for her, sex might be just one more thing you want from her, while not giving her what she actually needs, which is emotional intimacy, partnership, reliability, and someone who helps carry the mental load. She's not interested in being physically intimate with someone who feels more like her child than her partner. If you have a low drive, which is also common with ADHD because initiating requires executive function, and you might be generally understimulated or overstimulated, she's spent years feeling rejected and unsexy. Either way, by 40, the sexual relationship has often become either non-existent or purely functional, and it's one more thing creating distance between you. The worst part about this whole pattern is that you probably don't see it coming until it's too late. Because of your ADHD, you're not great at reading subtle signals. You miss the signs that she's pulling away emotionally. You don't notice that she's stopped trying to change you and has moved into quiet acceptance, which is actually the stage right before leaving. You don't pick up on the fact that she's making plans that don't include you, that she's thinking about her future in singular terms instead of plural ones. And then one day she sits you down and says she wants a divorce or separation, and you're blindsided. You genuinely had no idea things were this bad, and she looks at you with a mixture of sadness and frustration because she's been telling you for years, but you weren't listening. Or you were listening but not comprehending. Or you were comprehending but not acting. And now it's too late. Here's what happens after she leaves. You probably hyper-focus on winning her back. You suddenly become the person she needed you to be all along. You start therapy. You get organized. You follow through on things. You're attentive and present. And she watches this transformation with the most painful emotion. Confirmation that you were always capable of this. You just didn't think it was necessary until losing her became real. Every positive change you make after she leaves is proof that you could have done it while you were together but chose not to. Except it's not really choice for you, is it? Your ADHD brain needed the crisis, needed the massive stimulation of potential loss to override all the executive function deficits that kept you stuck. But she doesn't care about the neurology anymore. She just sees that you can do it now, which means you could have done it then, and that makes everything worse. The changes that might have saved the relationship if you'd made them 5 years ago just reinforce her decision to leave. Women over 40 who leave ADHD men often describe feeling like they can breathe for the first time in years. They're not angry anymore. They're not resentful anymore. They're not constantly anxious about what's falling through the cracks. They're just relieved. They take over the finances completely and discover they're actually better off because they're no longer compensating for your financial chaos. They make plans and execute them without having to account for your time blindness or task initiation problems. They go to social events and enjoy themselves without managing your presence. They have difficult emotions without having to regulate yours too. Their nervous systems calm down. The constant low-level stress they were carrying dissolves. And this is why they never look back. It's not that they stop caring about you as a person. It's that they finally experience what life is like without the massive overhead cost of being partnered with you. And that experience is so profoundly freeing that going back becomes unthinkable. The cultural narrative about ADHD has gotten better in recent years. There's more awareness, more understanding, more accommodation, and that's good. But here's what the gentle awareness campaigns don't tell you. Understanding your neurology explains your behavior, but it doesn't negate the impact of that behavior on other people. Your partner understanding that you have working memory deficits doesn't make it less exhausting for her to be the only one who remembers important things. Your family knowing you have rejection sensitivity doesn't make it easier to communicate with you. Your friends understanding that you hyper-focus doesn't make them less frustrated when you disappear for weeks into a new obsession and ignore their messages. The explanation helps people be compassionate, but compassion has limits, and by 40, she's hit hers. There's often a specific moment women describe when they knew it was over. For some, it's coming home to find you haven't done the one important thing you promised to do, again, and instead of anger, they just feel empty. For others, it's watching you be fully present and engaged with something related to your special interest, while unable to show that same presence for anything related to her or the relationship. For some, it's a conversation where they try one more time to explain what they need, and they can see in your eyes that you're not really processing it, that 2 days from now, you won't remember the details of what they said, that nothing will change. That moment of knowing is often quiet. There's no big fight. There's just this internal click, like a door locking, and she's on the other side of it. Here's something you need to understand about the 40-year-old woman who's leaving. She's not the same person you met. She's been shaped by years of making do, compensating, adjusting her expectations downward, managing her disappointment. She's tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. And she's finally ready to prioritize herself. The culture tells women they're supposed to be endlessly patient, endlessly accommodating, endlessly supportive. They're supposed to love you through your struggles and never give up. But at 40, a lot of women just stop listening to that cultural programming. They give themselves permission to want more, to need more, to demand more. And if you can't provide it, they're willing to be alone. Because being alone sounds peaceful compared to the chaos of being with you. Drop a comment if you've lived through this pattern from either side. If you're the ADHD man watching your relationship crumble and finally understanding why, or if you're the partner who's reaching that breaking point and needed to hear that what you're feeling is valid. The tragedy of this whole pattern is that ADHD is manageable. With the right combination of medication, therapy, coaching, systems, and structures, you can absolutely be a functional partner. But it requires you to acknowledge the severity of the problem and commit to intensive, ongoing work to manage your symptoms. And that work is hard. It's harder than anything else you'll do, It requires consistent effort in exactly the areas where your brain is least capable of consistent effort. It's a cruel irony, but it's not impossible. The men who manage to maintain long-term relationships with their ADHD do it by treating symptom management like a full-time job. They don't rely on willpower or good intentions. They build external systems. They use timers and alarms and lists and apps. They work with professionals. They take medication if it helps. They communicate proactively about their limitations and create backup plans. They do the boring, repetitive maintenance work of keeping their lives structured, even though their brains scream at them that it's unnecessary. They do it because they understand that the alternative is losing everything. But most ADHD men don't do this until after the relationship ends. They wait until the consequences are catastrophic before taking action. And by then it's too late with her. She's 43 years old, and she's done being your motivation. She's done being the external consequence that finally makes you change. She wants a partner who manages himself, because that's what adults do, not because losing her finally made it necessary. And she's right to want that. She deserves that. The women who leave at 40 often go on to have incredibly fulfilling lives. They travel. They pursue hobbies they abandoned years ago. They deepen friendships. Some of them date again and are shocked to discover what it's like to be with someone who actually pulls their weight in a relationship. Others stay single and find that they prefer it. They're not bitter. They're not closed off. They're just done with that particular dynamic. They gave it years of their life and enormous amounts of energy, and it didn't work. They're not interested in trying again with someone else who has the same patterns. You might be reading this and feeling defensive. You might be thinking about all the ways your situation is different, all the reasons this doesn't apply to you. And maybe it doesn't. Maybe you're one of the ADHD men who figured this out early and put in the work. Maybe your partner is younger, or has infinite patience, or has her own stuff that creates balance. But if you're being honest with yourself, if you're really paying attention to the patterns in your relationship, you probably see yourself in these words. You probably recognize the slow accumulation of disappointment. You probably know that your partner is carrying way more than her share of the load. You probably can feel her pulling away, even if you don't want to admit it. And if she's approaching 40 or past it, you're running out of time to make changes that matter. The question you have to ask yourself is whether you love her enough to do the hardest thing you've ever done, which is to consistently manage your ADHD symptoms without her having to prompt you, or remind you, or manage you. Can you build the systems you need and maintain them? Can you get professional help and actually follow through on it? Can you become someone she can rely on? Can you do it knowing that even if you do all of this, she still might leave because the damage is already done? Are you willing to make these changes for yourself, for your own growth and development, regardless of whether it saves this relationship? Because that's what it takes. And most men don't have it in them until after everything falls apart. The title of this video is Why Women Over 40 Walk Away from ADHD Men and Never Look Back. And the answer is simple and brutal. They walk away because staying costs more than they're willing to pay. They walk away because they finally learned to value their own peace and well-being as much as they value the relationship. They walk away because they're tired of being the only adult in the partnership. They walk away because they've given you years to change and the change never came, or it came too little, too late. And they never look back because looking back means seeing all those years they spent accommodating and adjusting and managing and making excuses. And they're done with that story. They're writing a new one now, and you're not in it.